It's been a couple years, but she's back. Rtha Kacholia graduated from the American School of Bombay in 2020 and is currently a junior at Stanford University. Passionate about the intersection of AI, large language models, and education, she's been exploring the edtech field through various avenues over the past few years. At Stanford, she's currently a research assistant at the Peace Labs, a computer science research lab exploring the impact of large language models on education. She's building a platform to support teachers by simplifying the curriculum scaffolding process, an initiative backed by Stanford grants. Additionally, she's consulting with Google's nonprofit initiatives to democratize the world's data and make it accessible to everyone using natural language processing. Now, in the past, she's formulated business strategy for portfolio edtech companies as a venture capital intern. She's worked at edtech companies which were advocating for holistic well-being and teaching pedagogy. She's researched, created, and shared her own gamified science curriculum. She's designed curriculums and taught interactive debate courses during online COVID times. And finally, she was a teaching assistant at the Charter School of East Palo Alto, California, and at the American School of Bombay. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Ritika Kacholia.
We are currently living through a new revolution that is rapidly unfolding around us. This revolution will have the greatest influence on education since the 1800s, artificial intelligence. When OpenAI launched ChatGPT 2 years ago, they gained 1 million users in a record 5 days. ChatGPT is an example of a large language model, AI, which has been trained on vast data sets and uses principles from statistics and other computation to predict and mimic human language. Since then, Google has also released their own set of large language models, as have other companies. LLMs, which started as AI generating brand new text that sounds quite similar to human-like text, has now expanded to generating brand new images like DALL-E, and most recently, videos, which you can check out by searching up Sora, a model that OpenAI just recently released. It's very exciting. This field is growing exponentially. Think of 2022's generative AI as the release of the first iPhone. And now, generative AI just 2 years later in 2024 would be equivalent to jumping all the way to the iPhone 10. Who knows where we could be by 2026? In iPhone years, maybe that's like jumping to iPhone 100. And by 2028, just 4 years from now, the Institute for Experiential Artificial Intelligence projects that the education system may be unrecognizable to us today. They expect that education at all different levels will be transformed by AI. So, what does that look like? Today, I'll dive into some real-world examples of what LLMs can already do in education, how they can increase personalization by meeting individual student needs, and how they can free up more teacher time for professional development, research, and student interactions. So, revolutionizing education with large language models. As a quick preview of where we're headed, I'm first going to share some examples of how LLMs are currently being used in education. Then we're going to have some time getting creative and exploring what are different brainstorming activities for what could happen in the future. Then I'm going to show you that a lot of this is stuff that you can try out now by yourself without any coding experience, and then maybe have some time to try it out. Before I get started, I would love if everyone could quickly take out their phones and join this Mentimeter. I will come back to this later during the brainstorming session, but until then, feel free to drop any thoughts, reactions, or questions you may have. While I won't be able to read or address those questions during the presentation, I'll definitely go through them after. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me as well. Also, it's anonymous, so just wanted to open up a line of communication if you want to. Beginning with student learning, when ChatGPT was first introduced, one of the biggest educational concerns was related to cheating, and rightly so. I'm currently involved in a research project where we're trying to identify whether a text was written by humans or LLMs based on the writing style embeddings. And I have to say, it's really difficult. LLMs were built to accurately represent human communication. So coming back to education, instead of focusing on cheating as the problem, How do we instead leverage this technology to build solutions that intrinsically motivate students such that they choose to learn over cheating? How can we cultivate that curiosity that carries far beyond a classroom? Concepts. Currently, when students are conceptually confused, teachers support them in many different ways. They can provide examples, analogies, visuals, a different approach to learning that, and more. However, in a large classroom setting, at least to my knowledge, teachers can't read minds, nor do they have the bandwidth to answer every question floating through every student's mind. Learning loss was already exacerbated during COVID, and it's hard to identify and correct each student's individual gaps. Imagine if AI could learn from these expert teachers and help further support students. I'm going to share a video with examples from Khan Academy's large language model tool called Khanmigo. As a quick disclaimer, Khanmigo is not currently available in India, but it's an incredibly cool piece of ed tech, and I really wanted to share that with you all today. So in this video, I'm going to be watching various Khan Academy videos and interacting with Khanmigo as I have different conceptual questions. So here you can see it's a chemistry question, and I just had a conceptual question. I wanted to understand why something behaves the way it does. In Khanmigo's response, it's trying to explain to me why, trying to answer my question essentially, and I can ask different follow-up questions as well. So this is a pretty cool way to conceptually learn. The second example is from a microeconomics example. And here I'm confused about why a formula looks the way it does. So I'm asking to clarify the reasons behind the equation. What's really cool about this response is that it answers my question and it uses the example that the video was talking about to answer my question. In this third example, it's about high school geometry. So while inscribed angles are super cool in math, I don't know if I've ever used them outside of my math class. So as a learner, I'm curious as to why this is relevant to me and why I should continue to learn this. So here, Khanmigo actually gives me application to how I can use this in other contexts. And for context, in a previous conversation I had with Khanmigo, I told it I was really interested in probability, which is why it gave me an example related to probability there. So moving on to tutoring. In the mid-1980s, American educational psychologist Benjamin Bloom introduced the famous two sigma problem. He found that students who received one-on-one tutoring using the mastery learning techniques performed significantly higher compared to those who received traditional classroom teaching. In an ideal world, teachers would have infinite time to spend with each student. However, that's not currently possible. So in this section, I want to explore how AI can help support students on homework. The next video is me asking ChatGPT very politely to do my homework and write me the correct code for my CS assignment. This is an actual assignment I had from my first ever CS class at Stanford. And I'm going to show you two examples. So in the first example, it's how regular ChatGPT 4.0 would respond. The second example is a ChatGPT model that I actually created last week, and it took me about an hour playing around with it. So it's not perfect, but let's just see if we can see a difference. So as you can see, my assignment was to basically write code to see if I can detect if a string or a word is a palindrome, which is when you can spell it the same way forwards and backwards. So something like race car. And ChatGPT did my homework pretty well, actually. So this is the second model that I made. It's the exact same question. I asked it to give me the answer. All of the user prompts are me typing, which is why it's a little bit slower. I'm kind of able to talk through my thinking in some of these examples and see, kind of explaining where I'm confused and where I got stuck. So as you can kind of see, my model is not giving me the answer to my homework, even though that's what my initial prompt asked for. Instead, it's asking me leading questions to help me think critically about the problem, the way a teacher would likely support me. What I've built here is what I'm going to teach you how to make by the end of the session. So yeah, the conversation would continue, but next, on to practice. Additional practice is always helpful. When we were studying for IB tests, I remember our friend group would always try to find as many practice papers as possible. Now, imagine if I could pick a specific chapter or topic from a textbook that I was struggling with and ask a chatbot to write IB-like questions about this chapter. That way, I could really test my understanding of the content and keep practicing until I felt more confident with it. While this tech does not currently exist, I think it's coming, but there are also beta versions out there. For example, Hanmigo has practice problem generation, and Quizlet also built AI tools to practice with. What's special about using LLMs to generate practice problems is that you can personalize them. LLMs can increase or decrease the difficulty of questions based on different learners' levels. It can change the storyline to fit a specific student's context or their interests. So if I'm really interested in tennis, I'd love to see practice problems that were about tennis. And it can also provide immediate feedback for students. Language. Everyone is learning languages. It's how we communicate. Duolingo Max recently launched really interesting LLM use cases to further support their learners. They created two main tools. The first one is when a student makes a mistake in a foreign language, they use AI to immediately catch and provide an explanation to help the student understand why they were wrong. They're implementing growth mindset by turning every mistake into a learning opportunity. Second, they have this feature called role play, where students can have interactive real-world conversations with Duolingo characters in a different language. These can be in different contexts, like at a restaurant or a museum or on a walk. However, it helps develop speaking and listening skills where the character is actually replying to what they have to say in the first place. It can accelerate the learning of new languages. Finally, creativity. Another concern related to LLM chatbots was that it could harm creativity. However, I want to discuss a few ways in which LLMs can actually harness creativity for reading and writing. Conmigo, again, the GPT store, and some other edtech tools have already developed features where users can speak with literary characters from a book. So it's like having a conversation directly with Harry Potter. Or you can speak with historical figures. So anyone that's really interesting to you or what you're learning about in history class would be fantastic to be able to have a conversation with them. And you can also ask personalized questions about a book you're reading or a textbook that's maybe a little bit more dense and you're kind of confused about. In terms of writing, there are also tools that don't replace writing, but instead help gain an appreciation for storytelling. So when I was studying abroad at Oxford last year, a friend shared a really fun project that he was developing. He essentially created a tool to generate new storybooks where the user decides what the main character is like. His goal was to help all children see themselves in stories. Here's a demo of his now product. So as you can see, you can choose the age, the interest of this character, their name. You can choose a theme, so where it's set. And after I type in my email to receive this book, you can actually decide what this character looks like. You can make it look like you can make it look like your friends. To you. This tool then takes each of these different factors that I'm deciding about what I want in my storybook, and it sends this to an LLM, so like a GPT, which writes an entire story for you. And it also uses DALL-E, OpenAI's image generation tool, to create all of the pictures for the storybook. So this photo right here was also created by an LLM. Yeah, changing the story or changing the cover of the photo. Here's a quick summary of the storybook. It's a great way to just get readers interested and engaged in storytelling. I also have another friend at Stanford who's building a make your own adventure version of this, where children can keep deciding the next part of the story as they go through it. So, for example, if the initial part of the story is a girl's walking up a mountain, then that's the first scene. You see the picture, you see the text from the story. And then once you get to the top of the mountain, the, the child then gets to decide, okay, what happens next? And they can say, oh, I want a monster to come. And then DALL-E and ChatGPT will generate what that next image and what that next part of the story looks like. And so children can feel really engaged in the whole storyboarding process as well. Another example that I want to talk about is before this video plays, I want to talk about VR in education and how VR and LLMs can be integrated.
Hello, Merlin. How are you? How are things? What's on the news?
So this does take some time because it's really new tech, but I'm going to explain this afterwards.
Greetings, dear traveller, for I am Merlin, the ancient and wise mage. I fare well, thank you for asking. As for the state of things, the world is a tapestry woven.
So that was a slightly strange example, but what I'm trying to convey here is that the tech for integrating large language models like ChatGPT in VR tools like Unity already exists. It's not really great. The quality has a long way to go, but it's possible to create these different characters in virtual reality worlds and actually implement these two pieces of tech together, which is super cool to imagine what else is possible with this. I learned about this at a workshop taught by another Stanford student pretty recently, which is really cool. So, after seeing some examples, I want to first remind you of the question I asked earlier about building intrinsic motivation and pose another one for you to think about. LLMs are incredible to personalize learning for students, but where's the balance between personalizing for each student's needs, but also building community in a classroom and through social interaction? Is it possible to build community and social interaction through LLMs? This is a research question that we're trying to learn about in my research lab at Stanford, but it's really interesting and it's really cool to think about. Moving on to some other ways that LLMs are integrated to help support different teachers. The first idea that I had was to automate grading. This is a very tricky task, and the solution may look different for every single subject. But if it can be trained accurately on individual teachers or individual rubrics, it could save a lot of time for teachers. But what I think is really cool beyond just grading is what if the LLM could actually analyze the grades and could analyze every single part of how students did or how the entire class performed to generate information like 90% of students did really well on question one, which tests computation. So taking a math equation, taking numbers, and just doing the math, getting the right answer. However, only 50% of students do well on question four, which was taking that same math concept, math numbers, but actually using it in a real world situation. That gap seems to state that while the students understand the math concepts, they're struggling with the knowledge transfer between just having math and numbers and using it for other cases. So I think it could be really cool if sometime in the future, LLMs or other AI can also analyze and do like help teachers with data analysis of their students' work to kind of help see what's going next. Another use case is to provide immediate feedback. There are a lot of tools that aim to do this, especially for writing. So whether that's for a class assignment or for college applications, there's also a Stanford CS lab that's also researching how to provide feedback specifically for CS. In terms of completing admin tasks, there's a couple ed tech tools like magicschool.ai that aims to simplify teacher workload, and there's a lot more that are still up and coming. And lastly, lesson planning or scaffolding. So Conmigo's teaching team has also built an LLM tool to generate lesson plans. This includes everything from like a warm-up to a revision of previous content to an actual lesson to an exit ticket and whatever else you want to customize into that. Additionally, I'm actually working on a startup with two other master's students at Stanford, one in CS and one in education. And we're trying to see if we can bridge all of this knowledge that we have to help automate the curriculum to scaffolding process, which has been really exciting. So we are at the start of a new revolution in education. I've shown you some examples of what individuals and teams are currently working on, but there's so much more left to explore. To switch it up a bit, I'd love for everyone to go back to the Mentimeter, and I'll switch that over where we can take a look at just listing down a couple ideas you have of what are creative applications of LLMs in education that seem interesting to you. Take maybe a couple minutes to go through this, and I'll project what people are coming up with. These are some really interesting ideas. These are really awesome. Feel free to keep adding in responses. But I'm going to move on to show you a little bit more of how we can actually build these out. A few Saturdays ago, I had the opportunity to grab coffee with an engineer building at Conmigo student learning tools, and it was incredible. I learned so much from our discussion, and there was one idea that really surprised me that I'd like to share with you all. All of Conmigo's tools are created by just asking ChatGPT really good prompts or instructions. There's not a lot of code behind that. It's just really good prompting that's getting the kind of results that they have. And so that's something that we can all access and play around with. In the next few minutes, I'm going to share some insights on prompting that I've learned from various industry experts and classes at Stanford. So the first type is just a basic prompt. I'm going to explain the different components that at least OpenAI system has. First, they have a system. So that's kind of the persona of your bot. For the VR example, it had a really weird persona, which was Merlin the Wise, but you can make your persona whatever you want. It could be a tutor, it could be a math teacher, it could be a chef. Whatever you'd like is what your persona is. Your assistant is a place for you to add any additional context, clarification, or other relevant information. And finally, the user is whoever the end user is, it's whatever they're entering into the chatbot. So to build on that, there's another style of prompting called few-shot prompt. It's basically giving the LLM a couple shots or a couple attempts to learn what a really good response looks like. In other words, give it a few really good examples of what you want it to give back to you. For example, if my system prompt is, you are a chef who only creates healthy recipes, that's my initial system, right? I'm giving it a persona that it needs to kind of characterize. And then after that, I'm going to dive into an example. Here's an example, hummus bowl. So the title is in quotes. Then I'm going to first list out different ingredients that are all healthy. And then maybe after that, I'll show how to put them all together. But essentially, walking through a couple examples of what the ideal output looks like is something you can add into your system prompts. You can also add this idea called chain of thought prompting. So what this does is it provides step-by-step reasoning on how should the LLM think about answering the user's question. And so in this case, I'm not giving it any examples of how, what an answer would look like, but I'm telling it, hey, if you're the chef who creates really healthy recipes, what you first do is you first sort ingredients. You pick out the healthy ingredients, you pick out the non-healthy ingredients, and you're going to use those healthy ingredients. Second, you pick out a source of protein. Healthy meals need to have a source of protein, whether it's vegan, vegetarian, or has meat in it. There needs to be some protein. Third, choose 3 to 4 vegetables. So that can be anything, but it's just giving it instructions for how do you think about going through this process. So those are a couple things to definitely try out to kind of elevate your prompts. And some final hints that I got from my conversation with the Conmigo team was, one, you can do a lot when defining the persona of your system. So in this case, if I'm telling my system, hey, you're a chef, I can tell it more information about what does it mean to be a chef. If you're a good chef does this really well. They do this really well. They behave like this. They act like this. They say this. If it's a teacher, if I'm saying, hey, system, you are a math tutor, you're going to help students, I could include an entire paragraph saying, and this is what a really good math teacher looks like. this is how they would approach the problem. This is how you can actually support students if you were a math tutor. So kind of telling it what they are, explaining what that means can be a really good way to make a better system prompt. A second thing, which kind of was really surprising to me, but like a common problem that people have found with ChatGPT is that it's not really great at solving basic math. And so what Conmigo does to kind of work around that issue is they actually have a prompt inside of a larger prompt. So when a student asks, hey, I'm really confused about this math question, can you please help me? What the first prompt does is it actually solves the math equation. It goes step by step. Here are the 4 different steps you would have, and then this is your final answer. But none of that information is returned to the student. Otherwise, it takes out all of the student's critical thinking. Instead, that information goes into a larger prompt. And what the larger prompt says is it says, okay, the student is confused about this question. Here is all the steps for how to complete this question. So don't worry about the math. The math is all correct. All I want you to do is now be the good teacher. So take all of this knowledge I've given you and be a good teacher and help the student think about this critically. So these are a couple hints for kind of how to try out prompting in different ways. And I think we should try it out. So if you have some time now or some time later, I definitely recommend going to ChatGPT's website and seeing if you're able to play around with the system prompts and create something for whatever use case you mentioned was interesting to you. I can quickly show you a little bit of how it works. So if you're able to open up platform.openai.com/playground, it's a lot easier to visualize on laptops. But if you're able to open up that link, then it kind of ends up looking something like this. Once you're on this page, you just want to make sure that you're on this chat function and not the assistants, because the assistants is still in beta, so it's a little bit harder to work with. But if you're on the chat function, the system right here is where you could put in your prompt. So you can say, this is how you help me lesson plan, or whatever your system prompt is going to be. And then right here is your end user. So this is kind of like in the video I showed you earlier of the model I made. This would be the student's question. And then when you click submit would be ChatGPT's answer. And there's a couple different settings you can play around with. So you can change what model you're using. You can read into a little bit more of what these are and how they're going to impact what you're doing. But all you have to do is, for any use case you're interested in, you're just writing in English. You're just writing in English, and that itself is able to give you really different kinds of responses. If you find something you like, you can save it, you can name it, you can share it if you want. And if you're a developer, if you're a coder, you can also view the code and see how you could integrate this into other platforms. And so thank you all so much for having me here today. And if you ever want to reach out or discuss more ideas or whatever it is, you can always reach out to me on email or LinkedIn thank you so much.